started exactly like you would expect a scandal of that magnitude to start, with an envelope full of secret documents dropped off on the desk of a journalist. And with the hard work of the Hamilton Spectator team, they unveiled a flood of allegations about mismanagement and even cover-ups by city staff and by council. This, of course, is the scandal known as Sewergate. And it is the biggest scandal in Hamilton's history. And that is saying a lot, coming from a city, as we all know, that has had scandals with its paving department, scandals with the Red Hill Valley, the stadium debacle. I could go on and on. But Sewergate was different. It was bigger. And it wasn't bigger just because of the 24 billion liters of mixed sewage that leaked into Shadot Creek and to Kroetsch Paradise, our world biosphere, over 4 years. It wasn't just the size of the spill. It was that it grabbed Hamiltonians. They were angry. They were talking about it over their fences. Neighbors were calling to each other. Did you hear? Did you hear? You couldn't go into a store or a restaurant or walk down the sidewalk without people talking about Sewergate, because animals were drinking out of that water. People were canoeing in that water. We had the indigenous water walkers warning us about it, and no one was listening until this envelope dropped on that desk on that fateful day. Now, we thought we knew everything there was to know about Sewergate. No, this week came crashing a torrent of more crap of Sewergate right into the Hamilton political water. A sudden retirement of the head of public works. Also, a few hours later on Friday, we found out that somebody who was his successor had also decided to leave the city. 2 senior staff that had been involved in this file. And then over the weekend, we started to see the results of research by an engaged citizen here in Hamilton on exactly what the timeline was. How did council deal with the issue? And did they actually try to stop the paper trail on this before the last election? When iElect saw this research from Cameron Kroetsch, they went out and put out a video. Graham Crawford and Alex Zafer put together a summary that I think is a video that every Hamiltonian should see. The Sewergate tape. Let's get right back into the muck of Sewergate, because it continues to contaminate our politics and, as far as I'm concerned, our council, and whether or not they deserve the right to lead us when it comes to the next election. Cameron Kroetsch, welcome to the program. You dove into this. I can't imagine going through all the council records to try to find what you found, but can you tell our viewers and our listeners here on the OShow what it was that you tweeted about this weekend? What did you uncover?
First, thanks so much for having me back to this new format. So happy to be here. Yeah, I find research fun, so it wasn't too bad for me at all. But what I discovered, and a timeline I already knew, I knew already, and I think many in the public kind of had learned or thought about. Council knew about the contamination in Shadot Creek before the last election. But what I guess I hadn't really seen or thought too much about was, well, when did those decisions happen? When did they make them? How did they make them? And who was involved? And so I started to just go back through videos and look at the timeline, and discovered that there were 2 instances before the last election, at least, where there were public discussions about Sewergate, about the Kroetsch cover-up, and about the fact that council knew. And so I clipped those together and put them together on Twitter, because I thought we should all see them actually doing that work of approving the cover-up of this report, keeping it confidential intentionally. And I think people seeing that happen live right in front of them has an impact. And I think we need to remember that, because this only broke, a year and a bit later, in November of 2019, once the Spectator got that, as you say, that infamous brown envelope on their desk. But we need to remember that this had a genesis before the last municipal election, and that actually right up until the very last council meeting before the last election, this was on the table as a discussion. They knew there was contamination, and they kept it confidential.
I'm glad you like research, Cameron, because we rely on you in this community for so much of it on various fronts. But there was something that happened with your research that I think made this so much more interesting for Hamiltonians and more alarming. And that was how Alex and Graham Crawford at iElect took the footage of those council votes and highlighted what exactly was happening in the scene. Because I think if you're in Hamilton, you can hear so much of this stuff for years and years and years. I've been doing a show like this for 25 years. And you can get to the point where it's all a big blur and it all seems like process and BS, and you can't even figure out who's talking or what it means. But Graham, tell me about why you and iElect and Alex decided to really put the effort into showing people the moment where the mayor sees it come across the agenda. Can you tell us about the video and how that all came to be?
Yeah, Laura, it was inspired by Cameron's tweet thread. He'd done the hard work of the research, so we had dates, and you're absolutely right. All of us remember Sewergate, but the details blur over literally 3 years since this started to unfold, and certainly since November of 2019, when it was first revealed by the Hamilton Spectator. But council was dealing with this for well more than a year, about 14, 15 months before that. I think what this did was it inspired us to say, we need to remind people about details. We need to remind people about what their leaders decided to do. We need to remind people that our leaders are hiding behind solicitor advice. So they caved and they hid everything. They literally changed the name of the report. They converted it into a number.
Wow.
So they never had to say Shadow Creek contamination report out loud. And that's clear in the video.
That is, I just got to stop you there for a second, Graham, because, I know a lot of our audience are used to the shenanigans of Hamilton Council. And sometimes it feels like they have no shame and we're used to it. It's baked in the cake almost. I see you nodding your head, Cameron. But that's a step to say we are going to take the name off this file. So effectively, we're not kind of triggering the public awareness of what we're discussing. But does it also have the effect of making it more difficult to get freedom of information requests on it, or more difficult for tracking? I mean, is it that kind of a dark arts move?
Well, if the question is to me, then yeah, I mean, whether they did it for those reasons, only they know. But it absolutely has an impact on if you want to find stuff, you can't. Now, bearing in mind, these documents are confidential anyway, but you couldn't even track the title through its lifespan with council because they changed it to a number. If you weren't Cameron Kroetsch, if you didn't know what you were watching, when the clerk, rather than saying, oh, Mr. Mayor, you've forgotten to take a vote on item 10.4, which is the Shadow Creek contamination report, watch the clerk in the video. She literally points over to, because the mayor says, what's this about? And she points to the solicitor and said, it's about that, the advice given by, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And the mayor says, oh yeah. They obviously didn't want to talk about it. The fact that the Hamilton Spectator didn't know anything about it, our mainstream media, I don't think they were asleep at the wheel. The fact is, the wheel wasn't evident because of what council did. Remember, we're also dealing with two issues here. There's a failure of management, which is the leak itself, and there's a failure of leadership, which is what our council did. And we need, both of those are a problem. But I'm with you, Laura, and you've been very eloquent about this, unfortunately, for the past 2 years, because it's been that long, that it's the cover-up that is actually the worst part. They did this to us, and the reason they seem to have done it is for them, because it was clear the election was coming, and they didn't want to wear this during the election campaign. That is certainly my personal conclusion. Whether that's accurate or not, they can tell us, but I'm telling you, the evidence looks pretty bad.
It does look bad, and the Spectator has put it on the record that there was a cover-up. This is not just the three of us opining on whether or not we thought there was. The Spectator had that in their headlines. They were up for a National Newspaper Award because of breaking this scandal wide open. And one of the things that's so painful when I watched that video that iElect put together of Cameron's research is you felt that anger at that breaking of the public trust again. I mean, that's what pisses off everyone about Sewergate. I don't care if it's my 80-year-old neighbor across the street. I don't care who it is. I mean, watching people from the RBG with tears in their eyes doing media on this when it came out, just the sense of betrayal that people felt. Because to your point, not only did they clearly conceal it, they took the name off of it, they voted to keep it confidential before they ran for the last election. So with full knowledge that they were probably sidestepping something here. But when it came back, we all remember hearing about that meeting, that in-camera meeting where the new councillors were getting the solicitor's advice and where there was a crisis of conscience and I think a fracture in our city council ever since, because they were weighted with this knowledge. And when the people of Hamilton found out that council actually had a meeting, this council, and decided not to reveal the depth and the breadth and the scope of this leak, and didn't protect us and didn't give us the options to protect ourselves and our animals, it's freaking outrageous. And this council still sits there having done that. And I said on Friday, we found out about the sudden retirement of the head of public works, who was on the water file back at the time of the Sewergate leak, and of his successor, who left on a Friday afternoon bad news dump day. What is going on? Are staff now supposed to be taking the fall for this, Cameron? And council thinks that what, we're going to forget? That we're going to forget how they made us feel? You know, if you're forgetting how angry you were, just watch that scene in the video from I Elect when the mayor goes, oh, that, right? I mean, it's enraging. So Cameron, what is happening with the staff? Do you think that they feel, you know, they've taken care of the issue? What happened?
It's a great question because the staff are at the heart of this issue. As Graham says, this is about two things, right? One, it's about some mistakes that were made by staff, but secondly, it's about leadership and about how they dealt with this when they found out what was going on. And when we look at the staff picture, we shouldn't forget this isn't just about Dan McKinnon and Andrew Grice and people in the water department. This is a public health issue. There were people for more than 1 year who were using that water, who had their pets in that water, who were out there in the canoes, who had their children in the water, right? This never, for some reason, and a question we've never had answered is, why wasn't public health notified immediately? I think what people watching this show might not know actually is in July of 2018, so actually a full month before we saw that first clip, that's when the very first news release comes out on the city's website saying that there's highly, and the word highly is used, highly contaminated water at Chedoke Creek. And so already there's a signal there that there's a concern. It's not until the next release, though, that they start saying, wait a minute, you shouldn't go in the water here. But we have no understanding of whatever happened with those releases. It seems like it could have simply been put on the internet as one of hundreds that sit there. And whether that was disseminated to council or not, we'll never really know. And that's, I think, the big piece for me here, the big takeaway for me here is what is council's duty? What is staff's duty to public responsibility and to public health, right? People trust the city. They trust our elected representatives to ensure they're safeguarding our waterway. And when water protectors tell you in staff that there's a problem here, they're seeing it and they know where the problem is, you have to listen. And you have to make sure, no matter what, that council takes it seriously. That's your job as professional staff. And I think the buck does stop in some way at the city manager as well, who's monitoring all of this to, in a cloak of secrecy almost, just as you say, dump it on a Friday that a couple of people are now no longer with the city without really explaining the context, allows for a whole circulation of rumors and tries the scapegoating process to try and take the heat off of the city manager and city council where it should rightly be.
Well, I love that you guys are bifurcating this, because certainly when the issue broke, there was Sewergate, the leak, the 4-year leak, right? And I understand why it was named Sewergate for all the right reasons. It is a gate and it was open and it fits with the whole idea of a Watergate level scandal. Big deal. But the Kroetsch cover up, the idea for me that, okay, yes, council's responsible for staff performance ultimately as a governance model, and they have accountability with who they put in those positions, and those people have an accountability back to council to break through the politics and to protect the public health. I take your point. But council consciously didn't tell us. They made a decision. This wasn't some technical bureaucratic thing they didn't understand. This wasn't something where, oh, well, there was a glitch with a gate and we didn't understand, but there, the overflow happens all the time with wastewater. So it wasn't that. It was, from all accounts we've heard, a tense, acrimonious, fearful discussion around the knowledge that they possessed and the impact it would have on the public. And they weren't wrong. When it blew up, it blew sky high. In 174 years, the Hamilton Spectator's never had more letters to the editor. Never, on a single issue. The OShow was overwhelmed with people who were furious. So how is this council thinking? And are they, Graham, in your estimation as a council watcher?
I think council wants to believe and wants us to believe they are free from any guilt or responsibility. Now, why these two people are no longer with the city of Hamilton, as Cameron said, we don't know because there has been no information.
Right.
But Dan McKinnon, a long-term employee, general manager of public works, Hamilton, gives his resignation in and leaves the same day. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen very often. By the way, we're now down two general managers because Paul Johnson is gone now too. And so we're cobbling together a leadership team and we think, oh, everything will be fine. And you're right, Laura, it's in the midst of a pandemic. There's a lot going on. And yet somehow we're going to, just muddle through and everything will be fine. Council needs to wear the second part of this, which is the failure of leadership. When you think it's a public health matter, because the Ministry of the Environment was aware of this, they had to be informed, and they were. And I also will say that there were people, the indigenous water walkers, who said there's something wrong. We don't know what it is, but we know there is sewage in the water. Something is happening. And that was probably 2 years before council was informed. And they spoke to the people in charge and nothing was done. So failure of management, failure of leadership, both of those things. But you said it, Laura, Cameron reinforced it. That means that members of the public went down to our world biosphere because it's such a beautiful natural setting. And whether their dogs were running in the water or their kids were in canoes, remember though, for 17 months they did this. 17 months they did this. Council knew and did nothing. And then we were told, don't touch the water. It's not a question of bathing in it. Don't even touch it.
It's craziness. And it's just bringing me back to those moments when I think it was on a Sunday night as we were watching this come out, and I alluded to it earlier, I tweeted the Mayor Burlington, who I'd done a show with once or twice back in the day. I said, are you aware of this? And there hadn't been a courtesy call, at least not from her reaction to me on Twitter, from the mayor to the other mayor who shares that same water. And when you look at Kroetsch Paradise, I mean, the amount of work they were doing to protect the species in that biosphere, to not have been the first call at the RBG or, public health number 1, RBG number 2, maybe the mayor number 3 of Burlington. Where were these phone calls all these months to these people, to these partners? I mean, council can put whatever kind of context around this that they want. And I certainly publicly called for the mayor to resign over their handling of this issue and the failure of leadership on this, to not inform the partners, to not inform the people who could be there to protect and to stop and to warn and to ensure that no more damage was done, that no more hurt was caused. Why weren't those calls made? And people can say, oh, well, the city managers the city got advice from their solicitors. Leaders have lawyers for input, just like they hire comms specialists. It's up to the leader, the individual, to make the decision. I did not elect a lawyer. I elected a counselor. And if my counselor is going to hide behind a lawyer, then maybe the lawyer should have run for the bloody job and not my freaking city councilor, because it's not an excuse. It doesn't work that way anywhere else, and it shouldn't work that way for these Hamilton councilors. So Cameron, before I lose my, here, we're talking about enough crap. I don't need to swear. Yep. Before I lose it, what do you see coming out of these staff departures? I won't call them firings because we don't know. These staff departures, is there now going to be, you think, an attempt to move forward by council past this issue? How do they deal with the Ministry of the Environment? I mean, the ministry said that their hands-off, know-nothing approach to the whole crisis was essentially a fail as well. I mean, what do they think is going to happen? We're only a year and a bit away from an election on October 24th, 2022. Hamiltonians go back to the polls. Do they think that we're not going to ask every single one of them every single day at the door? What about Sewergate? What did you know? When did you know it? And what did you do about it?
I think what we're going to see, Laura, is a lot of spin, a lot of scapegoating. I think that this discussion around staff is going to be one they use as part of a narrative. We've already heard council saying things like, look, we're cooperating with the Ministry of the Environment and we're doing what they're telling us to do and we're following all the precautions and whatever they ask us to do, we're doing, and they say we're cooperating really well. But back to your point, which I think is extraordinarily important, we did not elect the city solicitor, we elected councillors. We need a culture change on council. We need individual leaders who are able to ask critical questions, who, when they hear the words Chedoke Creek contamination, stop in their tracks, don't think of it as a routine part of the business or part of their decision-making day, understand the context and say, wait a minute, what's happening here? What's this leak like? What's the impact? And then have the temerity, the courage to step up in public and make sure that their constituents are represented. That's their job. Their job is not to protect the corporation of the city of Hamilton, no matter what they're told by staff and lawyers. Their job, as far as I'm concerned, as far as every resident in the city is concerned, is to look out for Hamilton and look out for the people who live here, the families who live here, their pets, their ability to play and enjoy the water and the land here, and frankly, to listen to Indigenous people when they speak. And so if they're not in those conversations and saying, well, I didn't know, I think that's a poor excuse. We need leaders who are able to dissect these things, able to ask questions, and able to stand up for us.
And able to put our health and our safety first. That is their duty when we elect them, not to think about their reelection or their political exposure. Because at the end of the day, as taxpayers, we're going to pay anyway for all their frivolous lawsuits, for all their real lawsuits, for all their screw ups. We're paying the price tag. The least we can expect is some trust and some honesty from the people who have our health and our family's health in their hands. Graham Crawford, former Citizen of the Year, last word to you on this inaugural edition of the OShow New Levels.
Well, Laura, one of the things I want people to do is exactly what you said. When candidates come round to your door, certainly if they're incumbents, ask them, why did you do what you did? If they're not incumbents, but new candidates, ask them, what would you have done and why? And I want people to remember, there were 5 councillors who sit on the current council who were elected in the last election. That's Clark, Pauls, Danko, Nan, and Wilson. They inherited council's position on this. All of the others are still there. So they are your councillors. They voted years ago to keep this a secret from you. Admittedly, the 5 who came in were told, or certainly suggested, I believe, it was all in camera, toe the line, here's the legal advice, this is council's position. Now that got a little more disruptive as the months went on, and then certainly as the Spectator put its story out. But focus on your councillor. Don't just focus on all and the mayor, your councillor and the mayor. Depending on what ward you're in, they voted to keep this a secret from you. And you need to do something about that. Make a decision. And Laura, I'm just going to say one other thing. The I Elect resident survey is not out yet, but it's coming. And I've seen the data. And let me tell you, everything we've said today shows up in that survey. People across every single ward are very and deeply upset with their council and with the lack of transparency and poor leadership. It's coming, and we need to make some changes, and that's what I Elect is all about.
Well, thank you so much for being one of the founders of iElect. I know your goal is to engage the community and inform them about the work of council so they can make decisions and get out to the polls and vote. We need more voter engagement. Sorry to quickly sum that up for you, Graham, but I'm just paraphrasing your raison d'etre. And Cameron, I mean, you have more than anyone I know, gone through so much crap with the city. They tried to do an integrity commissioner complaint against you, a citizen, instead of the office that was meant to hold them to account. I can't recall the last time you were on the OShow, but what happened with that complaint?
Yeah, the complaint went to the courts, and the courts are still thinking about their answer. So they have, I think the normal timeline gives them till about December to come up with an answer. So we're just still waiting for the answer to our judicial review.
Well, I am, as always, impressed by your temerity and your ability to kindly keep advocating and engaging in this city when so many times I know I've wanted to hang up and leave. And I thought to myself, unless this place can change, I don't want to stay. But I believe that it can. I'm a perennial optimist in Hamilton, and I know you both are as well. So thank you so much, Graham Crawford, Cameron Kroetsch, for being on the first of the new levels of the OShow, where we're going to, of course, have the podcast as well as the YouTube show. Great having you both. We'll have you back on, and stay healthy in this pandemic, right? We've all got to take care of each other here, Hamilton. Thank you for being the voices that people trust on the issues that we care about here on Hamilton's Current Affairs Show.